Thanks for joining us again today.
Yay, thank you. Yeah, it's good to be back. I'm glad we're starting a new series. And yeah, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, today we're going to kick off this new series with a talk about researching your subject, which is, I think one of the most important parts because it's kind of where you begin. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of share with everyone kind of how I kind of research stuff. I kind of came up with a little formula on how to kind of interpret what you see, and then show examples of how I kind of applied what I found into actual artwork for production. So yeah, I thought we would talk about that for starters. So yeah, kicking off this new series, and let's go. Okay, so so researching your subject. Okay, so when you first start a project, it's always a good thing to research your thing. It's like because what you're ultimately going to have to do is caricature what you see. Okay, but in order to caricature what you see, it's best to get it from straight from the source. So it's best to kind of seek out authenticity and then caricature from that. Caricature from the real thing. Otherwise, what you risk doing is making a copy off of a copy. And if you're familiar, it's like you know what that could look like. It just looks softened. It just doesn't look as great as the original version of it, as everyone knows. So that's why you want to like pretty much find the most authentic origination point that can be found and use that as the reference and then caricature from that. But sometimes it's not always possible, so we're going to kind of talk about that in this next hour or so. Okay, so those of you who know, I have notes written down, who've followed me for a while. I have notes written down, so I have this whole list of things. So I'm going to be going down the list and talking about this thing. So what I have here is this new thing, this new project that you're researching is new and unclear, and what you're ultimately looking for is clarity. Okay, and clarity comes from having more information. Okay, so it's just like if you were looking up an image on the internet or looking for an image on the internet, you want like the sharpest high resolution image that you could find. And the reason why is because that image would have more detail, and more detail equals more information. Okay, so that's why it's like you're trying to find the original, the highest res version that you can, or the most authentic version of it. The next thing I have to mention is that you want to be successful in this venture, so or in this endeavor, and success is going to come in making good choices. Okay, and good choices come from being informed. So you do research to become informed, so you can make educated or good choices. Okay, so that's really the purpose of researching, is to become informed, to ultimately be able to make good decisions when you create the artwork down the line. Okay, so there's this mantra, if you will, that says draw from what you know. Okay, so when you look at something, wherever it is, you could say, oh wow, that's neat. Okay, and that's great and all, but why is that neat? Okay, and that's what we're going to go into here. And I'm going to show you something, share with you something that I kind of came up with in an effort to try and rationalize and make tangible this process um, of researching and exploring. So what I came up with is, you're trying to find a style, trying to recognize its style. And what I kind of came up with is that style. Let me share my screen here. So I'm presenting this through Photoshop. Okay. That style kind of equals a combination of feeling, aesthetic, and the degree uh, of each of those of things. So hold on a second here. I am going to do this. Okay, thanks. All right. Okay, so let's start with here at the bracket of style. So what I figured style encompasses, style can be like a form of style of lighting. It could be style of behavior or attitude, the style of construction, the style within the details, the style of a clothing or how people dress, and style in the form of functionality. Okay. So within that are the feeling, aesthetic, and the degrees. So it could range from extreme to extreme. So in this case, one extreme might be like ornate, dramatic, overt, improbable, contrived, artificial, vibrant. And in contrast, on the far end of things, it could be streamlined, modest, subtle, practical, sincere, organic, plain, or bland. So, what ornate to streamlined, dramatic to modest, overt to subtle, improbable to practical, contrived to sincere, artificial to organic, vibrant to plain or bland. So ornate can really be in reference more to maybe like details. Drama can relate to things like lighting, overall subject matter, maybe a character's behavior, how they carry themselves, that kind of thing. Again, overt is another kind of like behavioral trait. Improbable kind of maybe pertains more to like maybe something like functionality. Contrived pertains more to general subject of fantasy versus realism. Artificial or organic can really pertain more to things like environment or materials, plastic or wool or, that kind of stuff, or polyester versus cotton, that kind of thing. And then vibrancy can pertain more to like color or lack of color. Okay. All right. So that's what I kind of come together. So when you're researching a subject, let's say you're looking at like a building, okay, run down the list, like recognize like how ornate is this building, um, that kind of thing. How improbable is it? Is it a structure that's sound, or is it like this fantasy structure that like Cloud City in Empire Strikes Back, that floats in the air, that kind of a thing. Is it practical? Is it improbable or practical? The general design, like, again, is it ornate or streamlined? Is it made of artificial materials or organic materials? Even a concrete building is made of natural materials, you know. But yeah, it's just recognizing what's at play here. And then you have degrees of everything in between. So how ornate is it? Or how streamlined is it? How dramatic is it? How improbable is it? How contrived? How artificial? How vibrant is it? It's asking yourself all these questions. And once you ask yourself these questions, you can come up with your own answers to say, okay, how ornate is it? Oh, it's kind of ornate, but not too ornate. So then that way, um, now you have this knowledge, and now you can draw what you know. You see, so once you know why it's great or why it is the way that it is. So this is basically figuring out the why. Now you can now you can draw what you know because now you know why. Okay. All right. Okay. So hopefully that all made sense. Um, I'm going to move on next into beginnings. So when you start to like research your material, one thing you'll probably want to do, you're most likely going to do it on the computer, is to kind of set yourself up to be organized. So basically, the next concept is like get organized and create, you know, a filing system for yourself. So here's something that, you know, an example that I kind of put together where, you know, on the computer. And what I've kind of learned is, I guess it's supposedly you're supposed to put stuff in your documents folder as opposed to the desktop. Anyways, um, you start off with general subject headings, and then you create subfolders within subfolders within subfolders that get more into the minutia and detail. So for example, you would have your project folder, and within your project folder, you would have a folder called reference material. And then within that folder of reference material, you'd have several subfolders. For simplification, it might be people, places, and things. Okay, so in this case, people, what do you have? Men, women, you could probably add one for children, maybe even animals, you know, that kind of thing. But in this case, you know, we chose women. Within women, you could have things, maybe one is fashion. You could also have fashion for men too. Uh, Maybe not fashion for animals, but people do dress up their pets. But anyways, um, so fashion, and even within fashion, you can have several subfolders. So like clothing, hairstyles, shoes, accessories, you know. So if you're researching something like we're going to go to into like something like steampunk, you know, you're going to have several things. You're going to have clothing in the form of like, you know, corsets and bustle skirts. So any images you're going to find, you're going to want to put that maybe in the clothing file, and you're probably going to want to create a separate file. One folder that says bustle skirts, one folder that says corsets. Hairstyles, you know, that's another thing. Accessories, you know, like in steampunk, you know, people had pocket watches, they had little fans, they had binoculars, opera glasses, you know, all these things, all these accessories. And so there's a place for that. So then that way, while you're creating your art, if you ever have to um, draw upon something like, oh, like what do shoes look like in the Victorian area, you could go to your reference file and follow the lead and ultimately land to where you need to and have basically a quick reference guide to give you quick reference to draw from. Okay, so there's a tip there. All right, so let's kind of move on, and let's go into kind of how I researched my current project, Hullabaloo, and kind of share with you kind of the little journey that I kind of took. So the very first thing that I think I did was I said, what is steampunk, you know? So I Googled steampunk. All right. And this is what I basically found. So these are the images, these are the top images that came up at the time when I Googled steampunk, okay? And so what I first tried to do was, again, try to figure out the style, you know, kind of break it down, you know, and before I came up kind of with that formula that I shared with you just a minute ago, my thought process was to really kind of say, what are the common threads between them? What is similar? What these common threads? And here's kind of what I kind of noticed, and I'll kind of read for you this bit. Well, the first thing I noticed was one, their clothing, and then second, um, I noticed their attitude, or one or the other, basically. Their attitude and clothing, were the two big main things that I noticed right off the bat. And so for clothing, I noticed that their clothing was layered. Okay. Um, like, for example, it had a suit and a vest, or a blouse with a corset. And it had lots of detail and stitch work. It was very ornate. Um, but I also noticed, went deeper, again, going back to the formula, trying to find the variances, the degrees. And I would find, like, lots of times it would be a mixture of fabric with metal. Okay. So you have fabric, which is soft, metal, which is hard. I also noticed that um, there was also a combination of, like, frilly and delicate with strong, solid and strong. So you had, like, frilly and delicate in the form of something like lace, and then you had solid and strong with things like metal buckles. You see, so you had that combination within the same outfit. It wasn't really either or. It was like this combination, and sometimes it would be balanced, sometimes it would be offset. But that's one thing that I noticed about it. For their attitude, I noticed that they seem to be troubled, or a feeling of being pensive. Okay. um, they also kind of had that inviting look, is what I call it, while also seem to be brandishing a weapon of some sort, to kind of suggest to either, for one to beware or to keep their distance. So that's what I thought was kind of neat, is you have this very inviting character, but yet at the same time is giving you signals, to kind of watch yourself. And that's what kind of created the drama of the piece. So that's why, again, going back to, the formula, you're looking at, like, the dramatic, the subject, the behavior, versus whether it's modest or not. Steampunk is not a very modest style. It's a very overt and dramatic style. And so now I know. So now I know, when I draw something, that to keep in mind that I'm going to ideally, to kind of support that style, may want to try to stay on the extreme side of things. Okay. Um, the next thing I noticed was color. Okay. Generally, it was dark and muted, with lots of browns and grays. Like the feeling of it's either dirty or dour, sad, or um, dingy. That kind of a thing. That's another thing that I noticed. Um, uh, in terms of the objects, I noticed that the objects were ornate, and although they were machined, they felt handcrafted. These objects had character and personality. So that was a kind of a thing. And I think that's what makes kind of like steampunk so interesting, is because it's a juxtapose, it's a play on each other. It's a play on on machinery that has no thought or reason, but yet it has character, it has thought behind it, you see. And it's that merging of the two, lace with buckles, fabric with metal, that I think, I would guess, give it its aesthetic in a pleasing way. It's fun. It makes it fun because it's a play on opposites. It's contradictory with itself. And I think that's what helps kind of create the interest. You see, so again, doing this research, this is how one can think, to kind of bring out whatever needs to be brought out in any subject, is kind of looking deeper and asking yourself these questions and noticing, these things and try to find the relation to one another, Okay, the other thing I noticed is that objects in the world seem to be, again, a mixture, proofreading, of modern day technology with old world aesthetic but I managed to spell aesthetic right. Technology with old world aesthetic in a process called modding. So here's an example of, like, here's what a laptop would look like, using, modern day technology with an old world aesthetic, Here was, I think, a funny device. This is like the first smartphone. It has like an old camera attached and a phone thing, and then a rotary dial and a typewriter for texting. And I thought that was kind of funny. See, that's what makes it fun. And here's another variation on the cell phone. Kind of looks like, kind of almost like Captain Nemo or Jules Vernish. Very frilly. Again, very frilly, but yet with steel. Something that's delicate, but also on a hard surface, made of hard materials. Again, I think that's what kind of creates that fun, that play. Okay, so here's the thing now. Okay, so what I realized was, looking at all of this, um, what I was really looking at is a caricature. Okay, but as I just said, you want authenticity. Okay, so where did this caricature come from? This caricature or series of caricatures came from a real place, and so it made me realize, what I really need to do is, I really need to go even farther. I really need to go to the source. And what I realized is that, I read somewhere that what this is steampunk. What steampunk really is uh, it's Victorian science fiction. It's basically how the people of the Victorian era would have envisioned the future. Okay, so taking a clue on that, I said, well, I should probably get to know Victorian culture. What they were like. So again, I figured, I go to its roots. And I would find out things like, and I would go to places like museums or whatever. And there's a place here in LA that I think it's called, I want to say it's Heritage Square or something like that. But it's basically a place where they've preserved a series of old Victorian houses, and they have docents who actually get dressed up in authentic Victorian garb, outfits, and they give you a tour around the premises, and you walk in the house, and they describe the details and the functionality of things. And the one thing that I noticed, and I took away from here, is that I always wondered is I noticed that Victorian people always seem to be smaller, because you look at the museums and you look at the clothing of the people in the Victorian era, and they always seem to be really small. You look at it, you'd be like, wow, that's smaller than me. Well, here's the thing. Here's what I learned, is that no, it wasn't because they were smaller. How the Victorians lived is, what they did was, they had to repurpose their clothing. They had to hand down their clothing from one generation to the next. So from father to son, mother to daughter. And of course, the children were obviously smaller. So what they would do, what the parents would do, is to clothe their children, they would take their clothes and they would retailor them and cut them shorter so that they would fit their children. And then, of course, once their children grew up, they had to find something else to wear. But the clothing that you see, a lot of the clothing that you see of the Victorian era is left over from their children, not from the adults, oddly enough, because it was the last thing to be handed down and preserved. So, that's something to know and to keep in mind next time you see, a Victorian display or something like that. I found that really interesting. But again, learning their culture, so that's something to learn. The other thing I learned is that they were very superstitious. And they were also very proper, and to be covered up was kind of a must, especially particularly for women. So I found this funny meme here that was like, oh, look how risque that ankle, to show an ankle was risque back then. So I thought that was funny, and knowing this would actually come to play later as I started designing my character. So now that I was researching, actual authentic Victorian lifestyle and and objects and things, I would find, like, yes, definitely corsets were um, a staple of that era. But I didn't really know much about them, so I had to educate myself on it. And so I basically kind of typed in, how do bustle skirts work? you know? And so I found a whole bunch of images and kind of educated myself and grabbed some. So I found stuff like this that people kind of put together. So I realized that you can learn from each other. So people share their information on the internet, their education. So you kind of educate yourself that way. So I found someone who kind of created like this, almost like this kind of like how-to guide of how um, a step by step of how a bustle skirt was kind of crafted, and kind of put together, and what it looked like from different angles. Again, this is all new to me. This is all brand new. It's like, widening my eyes, and I would say, oh yeah, well, so they would have like, oh, so that's how it worked. They'd have like a cage or some kind of metal shaped contraption that would be hooked onto a strap that they would, buckle around their waist, and then that's what the fabric would lay over, and that's how it got its shape, as a superstructure underneath. And then to create the gathering, they would use a series of ribbons that would act like straps that they could, again, fold, from underneath over, and then tie on the outside, or maybe even use buckles, that kind of thing. That's how they did it to help create maneuverability, that kind of stuff. So again, it's all new. Um, yeah, let's see what else. So again, I found other pictures too, like modern day pictures, that's like, oh, okay, this helps, how do they fit? How do they work? How do they tie in the back? How are they laced up? So I found, like, good uh, reference images to say, okay, I get it now, kind of a thing. But sometimes, there wasn't a lot of reference other than that. And so sometimes I had there wasn't really like a lot of great reference of photos back in the day, or at least not really detailed ones. Um, so I found, well, they have drawings, people drew these things, and granted they are caricatured, but at least it still gave me a little bit more information as to what the inner workings of the style of Victorian dress consisted of. So again, I would just like find these helpful as well, and try and just get as much inspiration and kind of put together the pieces from here and there and from all over, to create the final one. Um, when I did like a deeper study of it, I kind of came up with this as what I kind of found is very much like in traditional drawing. You're wanting to have straights versus curves. I also noticed that the culture kind of supported that as well. Men had predominantly straight vertical shapes in their tailoring, very simplified too, whereas women tended to, you know, emphasized more rounded shapes and curves, okay, in direct contrast to men. So again, it was a very juxtaposed culture, straight and narrow versus round and lots of mass, um, that kind of thing. And also very, looking at it now, it's like very minimalist versus very kind of ornate. Um, that was the contrast. And so to recognize that, and then so when I start to create my artwork, kind of keep that in mind. Funny, when I did this, I was looking up material, and I also found this, which is almost like the same, you know, kind of sketch I did, even with the cane and the arm to the side. I don't know. I just thought that was funny. Thought I'd share that with you. But anyways, um, so here I'll show you, like, share with you what I did, with the reference. And so again, let me reference before I move forward, because I kind of skipped over a point that I did want to make, is that typically in a show, when they start doing the research effort, the what they call the art department, which usually consists of maybe like the art director, production designer, sometimes head of layout and directors and stuff, will actually go on a field trip, on a research trip. And usually they'll go to the region in which the place which the story takes place. Or they might go to a museum to actually be in the, physical, be in the presence of the physical thing. But again, like, what happens when you can't go there? Like, for example, if it is a steampunk world, or in another project I'm currently developing, it takes place in the 1960s era. Well, that's long gone. So what's left of it? Yeah, there are some places you can kind of find, but whether you can find it or not, what you're ultimately again trying to do is trying to go like back to the roots. So you have this wonderful thing of the internet, to Google and look up stuff, but you're ultimately looking to get to the root of it, the most authentic part of it. So that's the thing I really want to emphasize, if I wasn't already clear already. Okay, so let's go back to where we were, and I was going to share with you things like, okay, so I would research, tea time and stuff, and I'd find these hats that women would wear. And here's like a tea time kind of setting, and so this kind of inspired me to create this artwork. I had to create front gates to the abandoned amusement park, so I would look up wrought iron front gates, and I would find these from like an old estate, and I would say, oh, I really like that, and I would use this to help ultimately craft the front gates to my show thing. Here's another one. It took place in a greenhouse, and it involved a secret elevator kind of a thing. And so I found, an old greenhouse from an old Victorian mansion and how it grew over, and I thought that was kind of neat. I found this old elevator. I thought that kind of style, that metal style, was kind of neat with the dome. And then I saw like bird cages. I kind of thought it kind of looked like a big bird cage for a human. Well, what about like a bird cage for a bird, like a golden one? And so, I think I just researched this stuff, and I just tried to find, inspiration. And this is when you start kind of going down the rabbit hole. They call it, going down the rabbit hole, which is easy to get to, but but this is just sharing with you examples of my journey. Even for characters, I realized some of these are both modern and old. So, I had this character I really liked, kind of like the look of, what's that actor's name in Cowboys and Aliens? I forget his name. Anyways, it's not important. Jason Priestley in Tombstone. I really liked that look, you know what I mean? And I found again that it was basically kind of referenced, a caricature carryover from people, how they used to dress. So here are two examples of two old photos. But I wanted it to look like that. And then this is kind of what I kind of came up with. This is how I kind of caricatured it. Um, Same thing here for the main character in my show, Veronica Daring. I found these, which were kind of modern, like these kind of outfit ensembles. I thought this looks really cool. Like I really like the feel of this. And again, what was I looking at? Again, I'm looking at like, a juxtapose of things like, fancy dress versus military garb. I mean, that doesn't go together. And I think that's what kind of makes steampunk so fun too, is that these characters are going on an adventure, but they're dressed to the nines, you know? And what I also found out is, what does it mean, dressed to the nines? What I found out is that the term references the fact that um, to get dressed up really nice and proper with all the things, with all the dressings and stuff, it uses 9 yards of fabric. And so when they say dress to the nines, they're, dressed to the 9 yards of fabric. That's what I found out it meant. I thought that was interesting. But referencing the Gibson girl, for her hairstyle, I found this neat old photo that I said, I really like that look. I want that for this character. Here's from a movie. It's kind of caricatured from this, but you could see, sometimes people in the movies, they do their research too. So you could even, take your research from a well-referenced movie, that kind of thing, but still recognize that it may involve some caricaturing, and you still want to, if possible, seek out the origination point, the authenticity. For this character, Jules, again, going through, once I started typing in steampunk, these images were coming up. This is kind of more what they call diesel punk, which is kind of like an offshoot of steampunk, another variation of it. And so I'm going down the rabbit hole and I'm finding stuff like this, and I'm thinking this is a really neat look. So let me, what makes it that look, that stark, it's absence of color, really. I mean, if we're talking like black, white, browns, that kind of a thing, or at least vibrancy of it, it's dark, it's muted, that kind of thing. Pale complexion, as opposed to a tan or blush, that kind of stuff, buckles, again, lots of metal, accents, that kind of thing. Okay, so then going in, I had a model canyons. So let me see, I think here's so again, I would research like, what are cool canyons? And I found these canyons in Antelope Valley, or Antelope Canyon. Look at these shapes, and look at this ray of light. How dramatic is that? Again, drama versus subtlety. I thought it was great color. The color. Look at the color. How it can go from warm to cool based upon whether it's in light or in shadow. Huge dynamics in there. But also, like, what is their size? And then I found this picture that showed their size here, and you can see this little tiny person. That's how big these canyons are. They're huge, so this gave me a lot to work with when I was creating this artwork, because now I knew how big to draw the cars and how to emphasize a huge canyon. In this case, I think I chose a Dutch angle because I could get more, well, when it's a little bit more dramatic, but it also allows me to achieve more of greater feeling of height by going diagonal as opposed to vertical. But like little details, like place where sand from the surface above blows in and falls and lands in crevices and then trickles and then creates like a cascading sand waterfall. Really, really neat. And so again, I had to create these things. So, we had to start modeling this stuff. And so here was like the initial model, but I said, okay, no, it really, I had to guide, I had to direct the modeler, you see, and this is why it's good to research and analyze and study, is so that, and to find out the why, so that you can convey that to other people. And what I was able to determine, kind of figure out, was with these canyon-like, shapes, is that there's a lot of counter curving shapes, uh, concave and convex shapes, round and pointed, that comes into play, that ultimately create these nooks and crannies or valleys for shadows. Um, so here, I kind of did a little sketch for them in the small corner here, where you could see, like, concave, convex, concave, convex, concave. That's the play. That's what gives this thing its character or style, if you will. And then they were able to kind of do like another round, but then even within that, I think maybe they took it a different way. So I had to re-emphasize, maybe this is too detailed. It's too much concave, convex play. If we look at the original thing, there's fewer shapes, involved, really. Even though it seems like a lot, there's actually fewer. It gives the impression, but it's not really there. Um, so again, I would have to, do draw over notes, and re-emphasize some of this stuff. Okay, moving on. Oh yeah, so in my research, I found this underground city, train station thing, called Underground City Hall train station. I thought, wow, that's really cool. I want a movie to take place there. And coincidentally, I think in that movie, Harry Potter Fantastic Beasts, there's a sequence that actually takes place in this uh, type of place. I think the color scheme's a little bit different, but the structure is the same. But look at it. I mean, how dramatic is that? And again, it's like color versus, cool colors versus warm colors. You got strong shape curves versus a flat straight, um, that kind of stuff. Areas of strong concentrated lighting versus nooks with heavy shadows. The dramatic play is so great in this, and that's recognizing that. And so when I created this artwork, I knew what to call for. I was able to tell them this is how it's kind of made. Um, Here's another thing, inspiration, with characters like these Harlequin characters. I thought, oh, these would be kind of fun characters. And they also look kind of spooky. Maybe they would make good villains or something like that. So again, these French masks and these, again, these hats, which had that shape and kind of incorporated there. Maybe color would be kind of fun. They have like some kind of frilly collar. Uh, heeled dress shoes. So again, it's not exactly, but it's inspired by. So again, I would take this color, vibrant color, diamond shapes, that kind of stuff, to eventually kind of craft your own, so it's kind of caricatured in a way. um and that's part of it, is the caricaturing process. Here's another character that I saw. Here's from the movie A Trip to the Moon by George. Oh, I forget what his name. But anyways, I said, "Oh, these are cute." I was like, I want to make a character like that. And I found this other style of dress too, and it kind of gave me a little bit more clarity as to what this all was, and a combination of the two ultimately crafted that. Let's see. Oh yeah, part of the episode takes place in a saloon, and there was a cash register in there. Like, cash register, what does an old cash register look like? So I had to Google antique cash register, and I would come up with this. And the fun thing about research is that it's like going on a trip, it's almost like going on a trip back in time, and it's really fun, and it can be really fun, and you see all these really neat things, that you never knew existed before. Oh yeah, I had to do a canyon opening. I said, what do canyon openings look? So I Googled, I think like, Bryce Canyon or whatever it was. And somehow I came across this picture and I said, oh yeah, that looks pretty cool. And so again, what am I assessing? Like the color, uh, the shape, what are these things that stains that these gray stains that look like water residue dripped here once or something, maybe I should put that in, that kind of stuff. Look at the harsh shadows that it makes, put those in the put those in there too. So this way it's like all this stuff isn't so random. It comes from a real place, And then the challenge beyond that, again, as a matter of style, is in how to caricature it, to what degree, what degree of drama, what degree of overtness, what degree of vibrancy, what degree of, all these various things, uh, you can play around with. Again, I wanted the, dashboard, the speedometer on the car, uh, to be old, and I saw that a characteristic of old things are these things, these little numbers and these tubes. I'm like, what are those? I think I Googled like numbers and tubes. I didn't know. And then when it came up and I look up the web part, that's when so it said Nixie tubes. Okay, so now I know what they're called. So now I can Google again and type in Nixie tube, and now I get more results, So again, it's like researching like what are these things actually called, because the educated people are going to post stuff according to what they're actually called. So if you really want the authenticity, you got to find out what these objects are actually called so you can type in the search and then get more information, more accurate and true information. So I found like, oh, well, okay, this is neat, but how do these things work? And with more research, I found, oh, look, they're actually stacked up again. Like all these filaments are stacked up in 10 layers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 0. And they all fit in this little tube. How neat. I did not know that. I was always wondering, like, how do they figure out how to make that shape with light? Well, it's the filament. The filament's already pre-made, pre-shaped. Um, yeah. I had to do a canyon wall. What does a canyon wall look like? I found this. Hey, that looks pretty neat. So then from that, I drew this in order to make this, you see? So I educated myself on how to make a canyon wall, and, one of the things that I noticed is that there seems to be like these strong suggestions of horizontals, very thin, but then there's also areas that are wider that still are, horizontal, but they seem to suggest now a little bit more vertical kind of thing. So this is where I kind of did, okay, I'm going to put some of that like horizontal, but then it's somewhere around the bottom. I'm going to go a little bit more vertical with it. And I think this has something to do with like, erosion and layers and water. Again, it's education. I love to say that I knew more, but it's always good to know more, but some things you don't absolutely have to know. But it might be good to know, because it might help later. And I'll kind of show you how it might be applied if we really, really get into it. Again, like skies, even something as trivial as skies, it's like find your inspiration. I think I typed in dramatic skies or sunset skies or cloudy skies to come up with stuff, and I found an image like this. I said, I kind of like this. I like how it's kind of looks like it's getting clear up here, but hazy on the horizon. I like the colors. I like how it goes from cool to almost warm. I love the light play, how you can still see the sun, but it's not just like this, round disc in the sky. Um, oh, these clouds are interesting. They're not shaped like big billowy ones. They have like, whatever. I think they're called cumulus and other stuff, but again, that's beside the point. But how are they lighted? Like, they're not white, they're kind of gray, and they kind of have like a dark gray patch in it. So this is how I was able to kind of create my painted backgrounds, as I got inspired from actual nature. Uh, you know, when I couldn't look outside and see clouds because I live in LA and it's a sunny day every single day, you have to go searching uh, for turbulent skies. I had a samurai suit. I had a suit of armor in there, and I kind of wanted it to have like this character look, and found or thought of these, samurai suits, and so I just Googled samurai suits, came up with a whole bunch of images, much more than these. I just grabbed these because this seemed to be the ones I used referenced the most. But I had to study it too. I had to look it up. It's like, okay, what's at play here? So it looks like a chest plate, and oh, it looks like there's shin guards, and there's some kind of like shoulder thing, and then but there's like a thermal outfit underneath, and it has a cut, like a diamond shaped cut. How interesting! Oh wait, that's a metal mask, and that there's some kind of all these things, and so then I have to caricature it and try and put it all together to create um, something like this. Um, okay. So that's part of my journey. That's kind of what I had to do with. I mean, you saw the list, like, in this short, I had to research Nixie tubes, factories, golden hour photography, gauges and dials, gears, oil jackhammers, rock formations, samurai outfits, phonographs, those things with the big record with the big horn that sticks out of it, um, dramatic skies, police bobbies, uniforms are called bobbies. I don't know if they're still called that, but they were at one time. Old car interiors, underground caverns, greenhouses. Later, when I start to animate, I would have to research cannon fire. I would have to research silent film slates, saloon interiors, exteriors, antique cash registers, telescopes, subway tunnels, abandoned amusement parks, old mailboxes, old streetlights, old etchings, drawings, because I was going to have a wanted poster, old blueprints, how they used to make blueprints and patented things in the day, what the style of that looked like. Um, I also discovered what plague doctors were, because that seemed to be a character that seemed to crop up. Um, those are the people that wear like the big mask, looks like a bird, and it has like goggles, and they wear the funny hat and the cape and stuff. The thing with that is what a plague doctor was oh God, which era was it? I don't know if it was the Victorian era. They would say it was some plague, and it was so like what we're going through today. They were going through a pandemic, and with their limited knowledge, what they thought was that if you put on a mask and and in the nose they would put some kind of cloth with either like a perfume or a some kind of disinfectant, whatever they knew to be disinfectant of that, put that in the thing of the nose so that when it went through the nose, you would breathe through it and it would filter it out. That was it. But that's what created the shape of that bird beak, if you will. Anyways, I thought that was kind of interesting. Um, but let me share with you now here some professionals and how they did it and how I got my inspiration and learned kind of how to do it, if you will. Um, when I was at Disney long ago in the mid 90s, I worked on Hercules, and they had a brilliant art director by the name of Sue Nichols, who um, sadly passed away late last year. But she was really a brilliant art director, production designer, and she put together the style guide for Hercules. And so I just kind of pulled out um, a few samples of it to share with you, to show you like how, again, going for authenticity, going direct to the source, to gain inspiration, knowledge and inspiration. And this is what she was able to do. So, it's again, statues and vases, and we kind of read it because it's a little hard to read probably your end. So I'll go ahead and read it because I think it's kind of interesting. Greek design. Greek design covers centuries of art. To find the style we want, refer to early Greek art. The earlier, the more graphic. Stay away from the realism of the later periods. Okay, good to know. So again, like no excess lumps or bumps. Okay, so here's interesting. So this is the later period, okay, which has more lumps and bumps. And you see how she kind of drew this note, emphasizing like, no, this is not what we want to do. We want to keep it simple and clean. So here's the earlier periods. You see how they're kind of more simple. You can see the difference here. And so she did some drawings, to emphasize the difference between the two, See here how they did hair, lots of detail and curls, but in the early period, it was more suggestive, you see, with broader shapes. So it's like, no, yes, same thing here, kind of get the, emphasis across. Again, noticing the style, how overt, how subtle, how streamlined, that kind of thing. Learning the style, asking the why, finding the answers. See, reference period is the Greek art that is simple shapes, bold silhouettes, repeated lines and shapes. Notice how the shape and lines repeated and the borders are also repeated in the vase figures, So again, lots of repeating shapes, bold shape on the outside repeated, but they're also repeated in the figures too. Good to know. See? Here's another one. Simple shapes, repeating lines. Okay, so this is how it was nice of what Sue did, is that she kind of, laid it out for us, kind of took something that maybe was not so obvious and made it obvious for us through a drawing, through study and analysis. Again, simple shapes, repeating lines. This was the inspiration for this drawing, it wasn't so random. It came with thought and intent. Simple graphic geometrical, she would see in this, emphasize it, point it out. Simple geometrical. Here's another page. Okay, here in our layouts. Okay, again, taking inspiration from the shape of vases and the curved shape of the vases and the very straight lines of the columns, and coming up with a mixture. Look at how you can use the shape of a vase to influence the shape of the world by giving, maybe the canyons have curved canyon walls, that kind of thing. And look at the negative shape that they can make, with the with a negative space in between, how it can make a vase shape, that kind of a thing. Sort of for both positive and negative spaces. It's absolutely brilliant stuff. And this is, I think, I was lucky enough, and this is why I'm happy to pass it on to you, is like, this is what I was exposed to at a very young age. It was really kind of blew my mind. And it really gave me a lot of hope and inspiration because, sometimes you think like, I just don't have the ideas sometimes. Well, you don't always have to have the ideas, within you. You can be inspired, and this is how it happens. This is how one can be inspired by doing a process of this, of like going to the source, doing analytical thinking, doing study, doing, asking why, not just going by the surface, but digging deep and then finding ways to kind of, find the theme and apply it to your new thing, you know. Let's see here. Go to this one. Here's another brilliant thing, draped cloth, you know. Um, Draped cloth is key. Greek image used in environments as well as in costuming. How we handle the draping of fabric will set our style apart from any other culture we've done. Pay attention to pleating. Show the folds in an architectural manner using repetition of pattern. So, you know, again, here's, you know, vases, you know, pictures on vases, vases, tomato, you know, that kind of stuff. It's like, well, that's how we can treat our pleating on our characters. So when the characters, you know, when their capes hang, we don't do the stereotypical, you know, round shape, you know, to give it its unique look. Let's find inspiration from this, you know, let's make it more geometric when the fabric hangs and the pleating, you know, that kind of stuff. Same thing with this character too, you know, patterns, you know, patterns that are drawn on vases and embroidered cloth. Can also be used in characters and layouts to help push a Greek design, you know. Uh, 3 or 2 patterns that are stand out above the rest as recognizable Greek symbols. The first being like this Greek symbol of the stepped kind of thing. Well, look how it could be applied to something as hair. You know what I mean? You know, kind of create clumps, or maybe designs. You know, on you know, in the layouts. You know, designs. On the leaves, but also on the landscape, you know, looking at the buildings, how they create that, I think what they call it dental molding, you know, or that kind of thing, that kind of scallop look, you know, and, you know, this is how it can be applied, you know, little curves, everything, you know, that kind of stuff. Again, maybe this might be too strong, too much of a degree. Maybe the degree needs to be softened a little bit, but the influence and the inspiration will still be there, and it'll ultimately, I think, give it its unique look. And if you look at a movie like Hercules and the other movies like Aladdin and what was the other one? Emperor's New Groove. You know, they have a. If you notice, they have a unique style, and that's intentional, and that's what they did. They found they went, you know, and they went to the source, you know, or a source, you know. Usually it was an illustrator style, even though that illustrator lived hundreds or thousands of years ago. You know, that kind of thing, you know, even Pocahontas. Yeah, Pocahontas, they referenced J.C. Leyendecker, and he drew with a lot of angles and stuff. And I mentioned Emperor's New Groove, and yeah, and so again, you know, oops, sorry, jumped ahead here. The production designer on that, Joe Mosher, you know, again, we took place in Peru. I think they did take a trip down there, but I do remember we all took a trip to a museum. But you can see here, you know, what he's taking from is, again, you know, the actual authentic thing. It's like, you know, these portrait vessels actually recorded specific individual characteristics. So again, like, you know, when we said before, like, what do you do when the place doesn't exist, you know, or doesn't exist anymore, you know? You know, we're, as a culture, we're lucky enough to have, again, like these portrait vessels that seem to kind of depict what people might have looked like back then, you know? That's our only real clue, you know? So taking the cues off of that, what do we find? You know, the look, you know, 3 features that tend to grace the Incan Peruvian face are almond-shaped eyes that, in relation to typical proportions, seem slightly closer together due to high protruding cheekbones, especially when viewed from 3/4, you know, like here or something, you know. Aquiline hook nose is another characteristic. Um, Interesting. Distant cousins, Incan pottery circa 1470s, Peruvian llama herder 1970s. You know, I mean, look at how much they look alike. I mean, it's, you know, that kind of thing. But then here again, where do you go from that? just like Sue Nichols did with Hercules, Joe Mosher did with Emperor's New Groove, and he said, um, the Incan always represented their subject matter in the most flattering and graphic angle possible. Attempts at rendering perspective were never made. So anthropomorphic hawk warrior. Here you have this kind of, again, no perspective on it, just very flat angle, but look, it has like some really neat textures and um, shapes, on their pottery. Um, but if we tried to do that in our style, or in their style, it might appear to be too flat. So it says the challenge is to remain faithful to their graphic depictions, but reinterpret them into resolved three-dimensional forms. So again, like I mentioned from the head of the lecture, is you're going to have to caricature. You're going to have to interpret it to some degree. And again, just like steampunk, taking modern day technology with old world aesthetic, it's almost like what you're doing with these drawings. You're taking modern day sensibility of what we learned about drawing with straights and curves and shape and stuff like that, but you're also with that old world aesthetic of graphic and design, and kind of putting them together to create an interesting thing. In this case, here's this character using a combination of old world aesthetic and modern day sensibilities of drawing, to eventually come up with this. Something interesting, unique. So there you go. So, ultimately what this all leads to is creating what is called a style guide. And here's something I put together. You've seen the style guides, from Sue Nichols and Joe Mosher, and they're great. They have great information. Nowadays, I notice some of the style guides get a little bit fancier with their graphic things, and I'm no stranger to that. I took inspiration from that. So here I created my style guide for my show. And so again, I went through and I did reference, and I said, the two cars race through a canyon down into a cave, leads into an underground cairns illuminated with vibrant fluorescent colored stalagmites and stalactites in contrast to the dusty landscape above the ground. So again, I took it from all over, from even natural places like Carlsbad Caverns, to even the old Disneyland attraction, Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, to kind of create the look, and Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, but here's again what I was kind of create, like the juxtapose of it. And this is my formula. What I came to is that here's the graphic that I came with. Like above ground, it's dusty and brown and whatever, but once you get below ground, it's now vibrant and colorful, you see. So that was the juxtapose I was trying to play between the two environments, so that when during the show, when we're above ground, we're in one color scheme, and then when we go down below, in order to change, go down below, we change color schemes, and then we come back out again, and we're back to the dusty thing. But to do the 180, the color and maybe absence of color, vibrancy versus muted, that kind of a thing. Let me continue on here. Again, with the canyons, I would research that, take a lot of pictures, put it together for my crew, help the modeler, inspire them, say this is what we're ultimately going to model. And I would, notice, like, the canyons are characterized by abstractly shaped walls that reflect colors ranging from warm to cool. The other thing I noticed characteristics is like rays of sunshine stream down from the openings above and reflect off the sandy bottom, illuminating the canyon walls. So the reason why these are lit this way is because it's actually bounce light. It's not being illuminated directly from above, it's reflected. So the light from the canyon from the little crevice at the top is so small, just little shafts of light are shining through, create like steams or streams of light, or a God ray, I think is what they call them sometimes. And then that light hits the sandy bottom, bounces up, and then illuminates the canyon. So it looks like it's being illuminated from below. And that's what, in part, gives it kind of its dramatic look and feel. It looks so mysterious. I love it. So there you go. You like research, analyze, ask the why, and break it down, and give yourself your answers. Give yourself some knowledge, and then once you have the knowledge, then you can draw what you know. And so basically, research is ultimately about gaining knowledge so that you can support the idea of drawing what you know, so that you can caricature from a place of authenticity. And with that, oh, I have a call. And with that, I end my lecture. At this point, we usually open it up for some Q&A.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and ask our first question here, which is, when do you know that you've researched enough to get started, or do you continue to research throughout the entire process?
Oh, that is a good question. I mean, I think sometimes I would say, like, if you know you've researched enough is when you feel confident in your decision making. If you're still asking yourself how, that's when it usually requires more research. Okay, because that's when you have to seek out the answer. Like, how does this work? How does that work? How is this put together? That kind of thing. Or how should I show this? That kind of stuff. Uh, I think that's when you either know when you've done enough. But quite honestly, in my process, I'm constantly researching, because as I go, I will encounter certain things, like, oh, okay, well, if this place takes somewhere dark, you know, how do I depict darkness, or something like that. And that's when I'll start researching. Um,
And when you're designing a new character, what goes through your mind first?
well, the first thing that goes through my mind is kind of like what their role is in the world or in the story, whether they're antagonist or a protagonist, hero or villain. Um, and then I usually try to find out, like, again, like their style. Like, I try to find, like, well, you can even use this. I say, like, well, are they the type to be more, is their behavior to be more showy and dramatic? Or are they more calm and cool? That kind of stuff. Are they more likely to wear clothes that are, like ornate with vibrant colors, or are they, uh, you know, more like down to earth? Um, again, like artificial or organic, like, are they, you know, wearing armor, or would they wear uh, a loincloth? That kind of a thing. Like, how tailored would their clothes be? Are they the type of mentality that would like to wear something that's more tailored and fit, or more loose fitting and free and flowy? When I was designing and I didn't get a chance to put together visual material, but when I'm designing these characters for this 1960s era project, and I'm also developing, I would notice, like, you can do the range of, like, the men, they had tailored suits, with thin ties. Everything was fitted, it was very loose. But then you have some of the women that are wearing, like, these long flowy gowns with lots of, like, wavy patterns on them. You know what I mean? Um, the juxtapose of that, men and women, but even women still wear tailored clothing too, with their pencil skirts and pill hats, stuff like that. But it's just knowing, like, well, if you were taking two women based upon their personality, what would it be like? What if one woman was more of high society and more stringent in her behavior? The fact that she would wear more tailored clothing, uh, that is very straight and narrow, kind of supports the narrative of her character. Whereas if I were doing a female character that's just very loose and is all about free love, that might reflect itself in like a cape or a long muumuu, or something like that, with lots of like the tie-dye pattern, or the scalloped pattern you see with multiple colors, you know, whereas a lot of the I wish I had like visual reference, but as I describe it to you, it could do it. Maybe it's for another lecture, which I can go into later on another one of these. The very tailored look with a singular color, as opposed to the loose look with multiple colors. And again, like the singular color could almost support the narrative of the straight and narrow, the focus, the that kind of thing. Whereas, the loose woman is like, hey, anything goes, multiple colors, all that diversity kind of thing, that supports that narrative. So I really look for, as I wind around this talk, it's a really great question, is I look for the narrative, really, what visually, since the character can't say anything at that point, you're just looking at a static drawing. What kind of narrative can you create? What can the character say without saying anything? And there's a lot that they can say through how they carry themselves, their posture, but also how they dress and the degrees of that, very straight up, as to one extreme, or very hang loose and back to another extreme, very tailored or very loose feeling. That's the thing about, doing all of these, figuring out the degrees, figuring out the style, and the degree of that feeling and that aesthetic, helps create the character. So that's kind of really where when I create a new character, that's where I start from.
Our next question is coming from Abby, who's wondering, how do you find good starting points for researching more abstract concepts?
Wait, say that again. How do I?
How do you find good starting points for researching more abstract concepts?
Oh, like a good starting point. Um, that is a good question. Yeah, like if it's a real abstract concept. Again, what I would say is try to find the root, like something relatable. Like obviously, like lots of things, like even abstract things seem to come from someplace, Um, so I guess the challenge is always to uh, find the root of where its origination point is. You know what I mean? To find like the thought process, like even Greek, like even the Greeks and stuff. Um, you know, uh, um, you know, you see what they did. It's like it obviously came from somewhere, from a thought process. That they came up with. Their stuff. I mean, it's kind of tricky. I mean, it would to really fully answer the question, you'd almost want to do an exercise where you want to say, like, give me like a for instance. You know what I mean? Like, uh, and then try and figure that out. Like where would you start to look? Um,
Our next question here is coming from Madeline, who's asking, you mentioned using Google to find reference images, but do you use sources like museums, blogs, or Pinterest as well?
Oh yeah, yeah, and Pinterest too. Yeah, a lot of stuff came from Pinterest. That's available. Definitely museums if you can get out. I mean, nowadays we're all kind of like stuck inside. But yeah, like what I would do is, yeah, I would look for it. Like, you know, um, find like, oh, they have like a Victorian exhibit. Like sometimes I think my wife would find like, oh, they're having a Victorian exhibit at LACMA or something. I'm like, we're going. You know what I mean? So yeah, like look at the museums and yeah, they're a great resource for that, because there's something nice about being in the presence of it. I don't know else to describe it, but being within the presence of it, it gives like a third eye or something like that, or a sixth sense. You know what I mean? As opposed to just seeing an image of it. There's just something about it. There's a feeling you get. Like I remember, like in this Heritage Square place, they have a replica of an old pharmacy, but just to be there in the pharmacy, being surrounded by all the little vials and the countertops and everything like that, it kind of transports you, in a way. So I very much encourage, if you can, to get out and experience these things firsthand, you know, to get an infinity, a feel for it. But if not available, then obviously resource to either Google or Pinterest or any number of places, and learn from each other. If somebody has a blog, about Victorians, there may be something, or maybe a YouTube channel. You could even go on YouTube and type in Victoria life. Somebody studied it from somewhere. So in some ways, it's almost like, why rediscover the wheel? Learn it from somebody else. Maybe they've figured out something, or put some things into words, tangible words that maybe were escaping you. And if you watch it, you say, oh, that's a great way of putting it. I never looked at it that way. And now so learn from each other. So both from places and people, even ask people, like again, if I'm doing the 1960s era, yeah, it would be great to kind of find out from people who actually lived that era, like what was it like? You know what I mean? Like how did it feel? What were the struggles? What were the best parts? That kind of a thing. You can even get firsthand experience by, talking to people and people of the older generation. So get your reference from there too, so you know how it should feel. Like.
Madeline actually has a second part to the question, which is, how do you gauge your reference source to be appropriate?
Yeah, that's a good one too. I mean, if you're taking steampunk, for example, and you're saying like appropriate in how, like in like either authenticity or decency. You know what I mean? You know, um, one or the other. Like again, like looking at the Victorian era, the one thing that I again noticed is that people of the Victorian era were very conservative, very proper. But if you look at how they're portraying a lot of steampunk, it's like, oh my gosh, if anybody showed up, went back in time dressed as steampunk to Victorian era, they'd be scandalous. You know what I mean? And um, so it's like recognizing the history of it, so actually knowing more than just the aesthetic, but even knowing the history of um, of whatever era you're trying to depict, like Prohibition, uh, Civil War era, old Roman Empire, Middle Ages, that kind of thing. You'd learn, like sometimes with Middle Ages, we learned like color was a big deal. Like, certain people didn't wear certain colors for various reasons. For either it signified royalty, like I think what was it? We were learning on Tangled that purple was not a color many people wore because it was either, if I recall, it was either too hard to make or toxic to make or something like that. So it was very rare, and so therefore only royal people wore purple, and also to indicate that they were royal, so they wore purple. So when you walk down the street, if you saw somebody in purple, you knew that they were important, whereas the townsfolk or peasants wore less colors, that kind of a thing. So it's learning about the history. Yeah, and even the science. I mean, like, look at, if you do something in the future, okay, look at how I love like those in the 60s when they depicted futuristic concepts. You always look at these women and they're, you know, they're wearing a bubble helmet, but then they have a bikini on. So it's like it doesn't make any sense. It's like your head is protected, but your skin is exposed. It's just it's kitschy, it's fun. And uh, in that case, it depends how appropriate. See, it depends on the style of the sense of humor of the show. So if you're wanting to do something obviously that's really authentic, you're not going to do the that's to be taken seriously. You're not going to do the bubble helmet with the bikini. What you're going to do is you're going to do the full on helmet with the non-form fitting spacesuit. You know what I mean? But it's accurate. It's appropriate for that style, for that type of storytelling. Whereas if you were doing a kitschy tale, a romp of a science fiction comedy, like for example, like Austin Powers, was a parody, a satire of the Bond films in the 1960s. You know what I mean? You're gonna do something like that, and that's appropriate for that. Even though the decency factor might be questionable, it's appropriate for that sensibility. You see what I mean? So that's how you would kind of know. You would kind of take into consideration the historical fact, but also the scientific fact of it too, if that makes sense. Hopefully that answered it. That was a good question.
Oh, our next question is really interesting. It's from Sarah, who's asking, how do you find out if someone exposed to similar references already came out with an idea similar to yours? Do you have any advice to find out if your idea is really original?
Oh yeah, I mean, who is it? Did somebody say that nothing's original at some point? I don't know. I mean, it's so possible because I mean, if everyone's getting their reference from the same point, and if it's a point from authenticity, um, yeah, it's bound to manifest itself into strong similarities. It's not so uncanny. You know what I mean? It's not so far fetched. It stands to reason. I guess it's a kind of a tribute to somebody's done their research. you know? If you end up in the same place, I suppose. I think really like the challenge really more like comes in the degree of caricature. Really, it's like how much are you caricaturing what you know? You know what I mean? To what degree? A lot of things can seem to be similar, but in actuality are not because of the degree of caricature involved. You see?
We have a question from Jackie in the chat who is wondering if you could go into how you started your animation career.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think, how far back do we want to go? I mean, really, if we want to go way far back, you could say really as a kid when, I would like to make flip books out of actually like out of little note cards like these, with the little lines on them and stuff. And I would use the reference lines to help me register, like, where the character was at. And then I'd flip them and do that. But I was always interested in animation. I just didn't know how it was done in the practical sense. I think the thing that got me was like, I didn't think I would be an animator because I couldn't figure out the practicality of it. I thought it was, in my little kid mind, people drawing really fast in front of the camera, and they just drew so fast you couldn't see their hand. And then I saw a show that showed, I think the show was called Serendipity or something like that, and it was for kids, and it was basically taking field trips, and hey, we're visiting the milk factory today, or today we're visiting how they make boxes, and today we're how do we make cartoons. I'm like, what? I want to see this. And that's when I found out about cells and that they were put under a camera and photographed. And then it made perfect sense. And from that point, I said, okay, I can wrap my head around this now. I can see it doesn't involve drawing fast. Actually, it's the opposite. Drawing hand drawn stuff, you're drawing very slowly. But it was something I could reason with. And then I started researching again. I would, you know, go to the bookstore in the mall while I was a mall rat, and I look up books on animation, whatever was there, and I'd start to learn about it. I'd see stuff like grids, like what's a field guide? I have no idea. Blah blah blah. What is this? So I had like books like The Illusion of Life and Preston Blair's book on animation. I thought Preston Blair's book on animation was actually uh, what is it? Clip art. For people that wanted an alternative to drawing somebody dancing or something like that. Like if you didn't want to draw the same pose dancing, you could pick that one. I thought it was clip art. I didn't realize that it was succession, poses in succession. Um, but then I realized that later, like, oh, okay. And then, you know, Don Bluth started doing the video games and I saw what animation could do. Like, I mean, or I guess how it could be, how it can move to like a next level and be really more adult, attracting to adults, but either way, like speak to my generation or whatever. And I got really interested. So I found a way to write him. I think in the book somewhere I don't know how I found out. He had a fan club somehow. Through some kind of book, I found he found a fan club and I maybe it was a Star Log or something like that, like, industry trade magazine. And then I wrote to him and then he wrote back and he told me, well, actually assistant technically wrote back, but on his behalf, um, wrote back, go to CalArts, go to the zoo, draw from life, that kind of stuff. And so that's what I did is, I, I, I didn't quite understand what drawing from life or the significance of drawing from the zoo would be, but I did go to CalArts and that's where they kind of helped explain it to me, what the significance of that was. And then I kind of got it. So I started at CalArts and, really didn't know anything. Um, and I only had really what I figured to be enough money to attend 1 year. So I thought this 1 year I have to learn everything there is to know. So I studied like a fiend, and my classmates could tell you how much I really just had my nose at my desk. And it kind of paid off because then I was recruited after my first year of school to work as an assistant for an animator at Bluth, my dream job, and what ended up happening was, truth be told, I may have told this before, but I couldn't even do an in between because CalArts was not teaching the entry level stuff. They were teaching higher end stuff like this stuff, like analyzing and direction and seeing art and that kind of stuff, real in-depth stuff. They weren't teaching how to put a line between two lines. So I actually didn't know how to do an in between, and for a little while there, they were thinking that they made a mistake and were going to fire me and send me back to school. And I ended up working with a guy who was a real, excuse the expression, hard ass. And I was really kind of like, I don't like this guy, but really, in the end, I really liked this guy because he was so hard on me. He got me into shape, and I learned my skill enough to stick around. And then from there, I took off. And it was while I was at this job that I had a one-on-one talk with the person I was working under, and I asked the question. I said, like, how do you do it? What's the secret? That kind of thing. And he told me the secret, um, things about working with graphic symbolisms, that kind of stuff. I may go into that later in another lecture. And I did talk about it in one of my other lectures on CTN. You should look it up on animating when I do an animation demo and stuff like that. You could see, how I'm applying the secret that I kind of learned. And I took off. And when I went back to school in the fall, and this all happened with a 3-month period, like very condensed. When I went back into school in the fall, all of a sudden I could animate. And my classmates were like, what happened to you over the summer? How come you can all of a sudden animate? Because I mean, I could in my first year, but not that well. But when I came back, there was a huge arc of improvement. And they're like, what happened? What did you learn? And I try to explain it. Like, I don't know. I don't know. Did like that. Um, but yeah, that's really how I got into animation is I went to a school, they had recruiters come by, they had our stuff up on the wall. So I was exposed to them. So in today's world, with online capabilities and stuff like that, what I encourage anyone wanting to get into it is to give themselves an internet presence, a strong one, create a website, one that's easily navigatable. Put your best artwork up there, keep exchanging it with new artwork, take out the old, replace it with new. um, and make yourself visible in that way. Because I've known instances where, we're looking for someone to fill a position, and the first thing that happens is the producer will come to their immediate crew and say, "Do you know of anybody that would be a good board artist or a good designer or a good anything?" And then usually that person will be like, "Oh, hey, yeah, I know somebody here. Here's their website. Here, I'll send you a link in the email. Go look at them." And that's how it happens. Because then the email gets passed around. In my day, it was a memo. How I got at Disney was it was a memo. We didn't have the internet, so we had mail. And I was working on a show, and the show got canceled. And the producer, bless his soul, was so nice. He sent a memo to Disney saying, "Hey, listen, I assembled this great crew. Sadly, I have to lay everybody off because of tragic circumstances. Would you be so kind as to have a look at this list, and if there's anybody on there that you like, please give them a call." And my name happened to be on the list, and it came across the desk of what coincidentally was one of my instructors back at Cal Arts. This is granted like 3 or 4 years after I left school. This person knew me and knew that I had a good work ethic and was talented, and said and recommended that they give me a call, and they did. And I went through the whole portfolio submission and everything and got accepted, and then kind of the rest is history. But that's kind of how, in part, how it works is, you know sometimes it's like, when you see these open calls. I know in the LA area, studios are obliged to, or are obligated to, post the job offer, but typically the job is already filled. They just have to post it. So if you're responding to an internet solicitation, most likely the position's already been filled. But that's not to say that it isn't either. So don't don't take that for 100%. But usually, lots of times it happens internally, because of an internet presence that somebody has, and there's a lot of people some people I've recommended, and I don't know who they are. I don't know what they're like. I just know them from their work, and say, you know what, this person looks like they know what they're doing. You might want to talk to them. Here's their email, that kind of thing. That's how it can work in very odd and mysterious roundabout ways. uh, yeah.
Our next question is asking, on something like a feature film, typically how long does it take to do research for a film?
It could take like a year, maybe even several years sometimes. I mean, we're in development. A feature film is usually in development for several years before it goes into actual production. Like, you might want to say that, like, even before it's even green lighted, sometimes, if it's just in visual development, it could be going into research for years. Sometimes a usual cycle of production is maybe like 5 years for a feature, and 18 months of that might be actual production. 6 months of that, 6 to 8 months, might be post production. So what are you looking at? Like what, like 2.5 years? So the other 3 years are probably all development and research. So I would say it's almost like the ratio might be like half, like 50% of the time is all in research, um, you know, gathering material and setting stuff up for everyone to work on. So it's a huge part of the process. Yeah.
This next question's really interesting. It's asking, if you were asked to direct a new animated Blade Runner feature film,
Hmm.
what would the
Oh, cool.
development process be like?
Okay, so what it would be like? Well, here's the thing. So the first, what does the first go to? This is a really great question. I'm glad we had 20 minutes to talk about it because I think that this could be really fun. Um, let's just go right off the top. First thing you want to do is go back to the original Blade Runner, right? Okay. Of course, why not? That's the first place to go. But I would dare say, let's think about this again, okay? Like where does Blade Runner originate from? And if you really look at Blade Runner, if you look at like how they kind of came up with Blade Runner, from what I read and what I saw, it really goes back to film noir, like crime dramas of the 1930s and 40s, but set with a different aesthetic. But if you look at it, like the lighting is very film noirish. It's very, very intentional, very, how to describe film noir. That kind of thing. But you can look up film noir. So I would probably start from a place like that. I would start from like that because that was the origination point. You see, for, the basis of it. So I would probably start there and start to study that and study it well. Like again, what is the style like? Is it dramatic, overt, contrived, artificial? Like what are the attributes of it? You know what I mean? And once you know that, then kind of try to put it into the aesthetic. Because if you look at like it. What's neat about like, for example, something like Blade Runner, when you really break it down, it is a mixture of old world and new world because it takes place in the Bradbury building, which is a building here in downtown, which was built a long time ago. It incorporates, brick and wrought iron, but then you also have neon, you know, so you have like brick and mortar and electricity that kind of merge together to kind of create this world. So you're talking about crafting something that has that juxtapose. So let's just say if we were to do a new Blade Runner thing, you would think, okay, the artwork is going to have to ideally involve some kind of juxtaposition. You know what I mean? It's going to have to most likely blend a combination of two most likely opposite sides of the spectrum somehow together. Okay. When I'm thinking about the new Blade Runner 2049, you know what I mean? Again, it's like, I think there was like one imagery where they have like the two statues that almost look like, what is it? The gate from Never Ending Story. You know what I mean? Uh, but and even in the opening scene where he goes to that old farm or whatever it is, and here you have this flying car that's on this old farm that still has old stuff. I mean, that juxtaposition. It's Blade Runner really is a constant. The art direction of it is a constant play of juxtaposition. So that's where I would probably begin. I would try and find two opposing things and see how much fun uh, you can have with that. Um, yeah, I mean, hard to spit off the top of the head, but yeah, that's where I would start. Um, and then I'd even kind of like say, well, it's all very dark, but could you have fun in taking the juxtaposition of light? Like, I know the new Blade Runner took place during the daytime, but they still put it with a dust storm, so it was still you didn't get like a lot of harsh shadows or whatever. Even though it was daytime, it had like a very sepia tone look, which again goes back to old world photography of sepia tone photography. So again, it's drawing stuff from the old world and putting it into a new world. So yeah, again, that's what I would try and say. Like maybe you could take medieval. Maybe you could go as far as medieval in the future. Instead of 1930s, 40s. What if you went as far back as Roman era and and the future. Well, what could you do with that combination? I mean, you look at Logan's Run. Logan's Run did that. If you look at the costuming in Logan's Run, the particularly the women, they wore like these, again, like these almost like togas, but it was in the future. So the togas had vibrant colors, whereas the togas back then were either white or red or, that kind of thing, brown. It's like taking ancient Rome and the future and putting it together, and now you have Logan's Run. Um, that juxtaposition, I think it's always a good place. It's always a fun place to start. And then from there, you just kind of figure out the degrees, how extreme, how ornate, how dramatic, or how modest do you want it to be, because, you think about the characters fitting in their environment. Again, another juxtaposition. Do you want to make the characters extravagant in a modest environment, or do you want to make the characters modest in an extreme environment? That's something you can play with. Usually, playing with the 180, playing with the juxtaposition is a great place to start, and then kind of starting on opposite ends and kind of narrowing your way to your final, I guess. I hope that's good. That was a fun question.
Yeah, that was our last question. So I think maybe if you could tell us a little bit about what you're going to be doing in 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, so let's see. What is the on this thing for next week? Is next week's working with someone else's style? Is that it? Adopting styles?
I see, yeah, analyzing and adopting various art styles.
Yeah, that should be a good one too. So that'll be kind of like a little bit of an extension of what we talked about today. But what we're going to be doing is we are going to be exploring the idea that, lots of times when you're working on a project, you're going to be working with either someone else's style or someone wants you to replicate someone else's style. So we're going to go over tips and tricks and techniques and ideas of how to do just that. And beyond that, in the subsequent weeks or sessions to follow, we're also going to be, looking at, I think, animation designs. And I think at some point we're actually going to invite attendees to actually submit their artwork for review. So one of the things that we have in mind is, to submit a piece of artwork along with an intent by the creator. And then we're going to discuss about, kind of maybe kind of go through the breakdown of the style, like break it down into components, and then try to discover how, I want to say, dare to say, how successful, or at least to what degree was the artwork that the artwork achieved to create its ultimate effect, you see. So we're going to do some analysis like that. So so we're going to invite attendees to do that, and hopefully that'll be fun and enlightening. Yeah, and so that's really kind of what we have planned for the future. So should be fun. So I hope all of you will join us, and you'll encourage others to kind of join in. I think this next round will be particularly insightful. Kind of bringing people in and doing a lot of analytical thinking. Because it's about creating art and creating an effect, and trying to do so with style and an appropriate or certain degree, either one. But that's what we're going to talk about a lot. Because there's a lot you could do with color, shape, line, general approach, all this stuff. So yeah, a lot to prepare too. I do a lot of preparation for this stuff, and so that's why I say I really, my hope is that all of you attending get a lot out of it, or at least something out of it that you can use. And I thank all of you for being here. and being so supportive, because I do put a lot of effort into these things. I was up late till last night. I was working on it the last couple weekends, and I was up early this morning. I got right out of bed, and I just went to the computer and just started grabbing stuff like, okay, this will make a good slate. This will be a good thing. How do I phrase that? What would be a good way to show them? That kind of stuff. So we definitely put a lot of thought into these things, and we're so glad that you're able to join us and support us, and we hope you continue to do so. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Yeah, and so again, that's going to be April 29th. So
Yeah.
in 2 weeks from today, same
Yeah.
time as this one, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific time. And so we hope to see you all there again in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.